sing and no one would hear me. Oh, whoops. We're getting ready to start if everyone could find a seat. If you would like to social distance, you're welcome to be up in the balcony. We are fully supportive of anybody that wants to wear masks or not. That's fine. There's hand sanitizer, and we just want you to be comfortable. Okay, I think we're ready to go. My name is Dr. Patricia Bay, and Dr. Danuka and I are going to be moderating. So I want to welcome you all to this COVID-19 public forum. On behalf of the medical providers of Shasta County, thank you for coming out to participate. This is also streaming live on YouTube. Hi, everybody out there. So if you have relatives or friends who could not attend today, you're welcome to send them to the website, which is covid19publicforum.com. And from that website, they can click on how to live stream from YouTube. We're also going to be welcoming questions from people that are live streaming. Let me see. So there's an email list sign up. Please put the email on the screen display. There it is. So you can go to the email sign up on your phone and sign up. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Danuka, who's also going to be moderating and has done an incredible amount of work to bring this together for the community. He is an internal medicine and gastroenterologist specialist. He's the former chief of medical staff at our hospitals from 2001 to 2012 and in 2020. He served as the medical director of Federal Emergency Hospital during COVID in 2020. I'd like to welcome Dr. Danuka.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much. Look at this crowd. This is awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us together and starting this conversation in our community to help us heal together. And also thank you for trusting me as your moderator today. Let me tell you how I got involved with this. In January of 2020, hospital elected me as a chief of medical staff at the Mercy Medical Center. It was a trial by fire. Right away, we were confronted with COVID pandemic. We had no idea what it was, where it came from, what it did, how it spread, how it hurt us, how it killed us, how to prevent it, how to treat it. And I was asked to oversee the medical professionals who were unaware of how to deal with it. They were feeling helpless, they were exhausted, they were scared, and still they continued to take care of our friends and family in the worst of the conditions. Please, if we can just be thankful to all the people who have done this great job, I will appreciate that. Then when hospitals were full, county and FEMA opened an emergency surge hospital to deal with the overflow. Fortunately, we never had to use it. However, they asked us to build the clinical operation from scratch, which usually takes 5 to 10 years of planning. That was tremendous. Fortunately, we had a lot of physicians, nurses, and other medical providers who came together and who donated their skills and time to make it happen. And everyone on the team did it without any pay or without any recognition. Now, there were many more who continued to take care of our families and our patients and our community in the clinics, in the private practice, without the fear when a lot of people in the community would not even venture out of their home because of fear. They wouldn't even touch the groceries. They wouldn't even go to the grocery store. These people continued taking care of sick patients, even if they were sick themselves. So now, fast forward 2 years later today. We are still hurting because of COVID. We still have massive disruptions in our schools, in our healthcare, in our houses of worship, and frankly, most importantly, we still have the confusion around it. We still have the political divisions surrounding it. And that is still dividing our community and holding us back. That's why these healthcare providers and healthcare workers have come together to share their experiences, what they've learned in the trenches, what they have researched painstakingly over time, and they want to share with you. And these people have over 600 years of healthcare experiences amongst them. Many of them you know, many of them have probably treated you, many of them have probably taken care of your children or your families. And what they're hoping is to really provide our community with a much needed clarity. Clarity is the question. Confusion is our enemy. Fear is our enemy. A clear vision is our friend. And not the fear, but a hope and a faith is our best weapon. So we are coming together so that we can bring our community together and start a healing process. You will find many people here who come from different perspectives. They may have different opinions, but we are all united by the hope that we will all heal in this process together and bring a brighter future. And I invite you to join that, and I thank every one of you to take time out to be here, and many more who may be watching this live streamed. So please allow us to proceed further, and Patty Bay will go over some disclosure before we go further.
Thank you, Dr. Danuka. We want to remind you that this is a non-political forum, and it's about medical care and COVID-19. We ask that you refrain from promoting any political affiliation or campaign. We understand that a lot of us are really passionate about how we believe. We're asking you to stifle that today. And just let's listen to what these doctors have to say. You need to know that in this room of medical professionals, there are over 600 years of medical expertise that's going to be on this stage. These doctors know what they're talking about. They're not newbies. So we need to just kind of let them do their thing and stifle that need to get it political, because we don't want that to happen. We're grateful for this really large meeting space provided that we have from Pathways here. And it's important to know that the views represented here are not necessarily those of the people that have the hall here. Also, the perspectives offered by the individual medical providers vary, and they may not represent the official position of hospitals or clinics or places where they work. They are their views and their opinions and their medical expertise. All of us come from different perspectives, and we hold different positions, and we gather here to try and unite our community. We have all been so divided, and it has been so stressful on all of us. So bring this energy to bring us together to try and fight this virus together in a healthy way. That's all we're asking.
Just one more thing I will add to here, and that's my favorite thing. I didn't want Patty to say that. So if you really like someone saying something, please feel free to clap and celebrate it. But if you have nothing nice to say, keep it to yourself. Certainly, we won't tolerate any cussing, loud yelling, heckling, or booing the presenters.
Overripe tomatoes.
If anyone involved indulges in that disruptive behavior, we will ask them to leave. We will also ask you to leave if you are going to root against 49ers today. So with that, let me just go over the format here. What we're going to do here is, format is going to be, this meeting is going to be approximately 2 hours, and I'm going to try my best to keep everyone on the clock, especially because 49ers are again playing at 5 o'clock. The part one is going to be a panel of physicians talking about the different medical aspects. And can you put that slide, please? Okay, yeah, so that's the physician panel when we're going to talk about vaccines and natural immunity and treatment of COVID-19, vaccine mandates, and then Omicron and light at the end of the tunnel. We'll have 5 physicians who will be talking about these topics. Every one of them will present for approximately 5 to 6 minutes, and there will be conversation amongst the physicians over next 2 to 3 minutes to go over the questions and answers from the panel. After that, we will have a 10 minutes break, and during that break, we're hoping to have the break at approximately 2:50 p.m. and we will gather the questions and answers which you guys have written and passed for the moderator. We'll gather those questions. You will have some time to stretch, use the restroom, and then we'll come back. After that, we'll have approximately 20 minutes of second session in which we have a psychologist, a pediatrician, and 2 educators talking about the impact COVID has on children, the current state of affairs, and the future direction. After that, we're going to be going into a question and answer session, and that's the heart of the matter, frankly. I really want every one of you to participate in this process. It's not just, it doesn't belong to any one of us here. It belongs to every one of us. So please, there will be a table in the back as well as there'll be people going around. So feel free to write the questions on the index cards and submit it, and we will go over those questions for the panelists. We'll bring all of them back up, and then we will ask them to answer those questions. We may consolidate some of those questions together. Please, 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 this is not a payback time. I know doctors' handwritings are bad, but I can't read my own handwriting. So write big and write legibly as much as you can, okay? We are hoping to have a soft stop at 4 o'clock and at around 4:30, a hard stop. So with that introduction, we will bring our first panel up, and Dr. Patricia Bay is going to announce the names of the people, and please make your way through.
If we could have our first panel come up when I call your name, that would be great. Okay, so where did it go?
Dr. Richard Malaki.
Yeah, Dr. Richard Malaki.
Dr. Molatki has been a family physician in the community for more than 30 years. But more than that, he is well known in the community with impeccable reputation, and also known for his wisdom and compassionate care for a long time.
Dr. James Moo, family physician.
Dr. Moo has been practicing for a long time. He's also currently elected chief of medicine in a hospital here, and he has actually been instrumental in bringing a lot of us together and done the heavy lifting for this.
Dr. Fjord Orloff.
Dr. Orloff, having been in this, he trained at UCLA and Mercy Medical Center in family practice, has been in practice for more than 30 years again. Is this our age showing that everyone is over 30 years experience?
Yeah.
I don't like it. So,
Dr. Rob Hamilton.
Dr. Rob Hamilton is practicing regenerative medicine right now, as well as he has been an ER physician for 20 years, and he was the medical director of emergency room at Mercy Hospital for a long time before he went into regenerative medicine.
First up to the mic is Dr. Fjord Orloff, and he's going to be talking.
No, we still have more.
Oh, we
Dr.
do? Okay.
Amy.
Oh, you want to read the rest?
So, so, Dr. Amy Currentes, she's an OBGYN person and OBGYN specialist. She's probably the youngest amongst us. She's the young blood. And she has a passion, and not just a passion, but also she is very action-oriented. She took a stand in favor of her convictions recently when she was forced to follow the commands which went against her actions. So, hands off to her. So with that, we will start our conversation, and we will invite Dr. Patricia back because she's going to be on the second panel with the psychologist. Thank you, Patty. Okay, so really the floor belongs to these people now, and I'm just going to be reminding them to stay on time. I'm the timekeeper here, okay? Everyone, this is a talking stick. Okay, so with that, let's start with our first panelist, Dr. Orloff. So, Dr. Orloff, can we just ask you to run through the basic kind of science of how immunity works for COVID, and I know this is going to be kind of a lecture on the science, but just please about natural immunity versus vaccine-induced immunity, and then how does it work? Could you please take the floor? Thank you.
You said 5 to 6 minutes? All right.
Well, we are friends. We go a long way, so
okay.
Maybe a little bit longer.
Cut me some slack. All right. So just for people always ask me, how do I pronounce my first name? It's Pepcid. Okay. Last name's easy, Orloff. I also go by Doc. Okay. Because there's a lot of confusion and misinformation out there, it would be worthwhile to take a moment to first review how our immune system works. There's a lot of information to cover, so strap in. You're all going to medical school. We basically have two components in our immune system, innate and adaptive immunity. Innate immunity refers to our body's built-in protection and first line of defense. For example, our skin, our mucous membranes, our stomach acid, our bacterial flora, cells in our bloodstream that can attack and destroy infections. In addition, our body can do things like induce a fever, which is detrimental to viruses. All of this does not depend on the virus, but on our health status. That is why it's so important to take care of our body, get adequate sleep, proper nutrition, exercise, and avoid smoking. The adaptive immune system is really a backup plan for when the innate immune system has been breached and an infection has been established. It allows our body to target specific pathogens. The basic principle here is when our body recognizes a foreign invader, in this case COVID-19, it targets the virus with T cells and B cells, which then trigger an inflammatory response and antibody production. These antibodies and T cells are specific to the proteins that our immune system is exposed to at the time of infection or inoculation. The immune system then holds the blueprints to those antibodies in its memory for when it comes into contact with the same virus again. Unlike antibodies that disable the virus on contact, T cells recognize when our own cells have been infected by the virus and destroy them, thereby disabling the virus's ability to reproduce and spread, worsening the infection. I should also mention passive immunity. Passive immunity is when we acquire antibodies from another source, such as breastfeeding or monoclonal antibodies. These passive antibodies provide immediate protection, but only for a short period of time. Now that the science lecture is over, let's talk specifics of natural and vaccine-based immunity. Both natural and vaccine immunity produces antibodies and T cells. Unfortunately, antibodies levels tend to decline. This is why boosters are recommended for every 5 to 6 months. T cells, however, continue to provide long-term protection, but are only triggered by re-exposure. Vaccines trigger our immune system without having to be infected. Currently, there are 2 types of COVID-19 vaccines approved by the FDA, but they only target the original alpha strain spike protein. Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA vaccines. mRNA in our cells produce proteins. After vaccination, our cells take up the mRNA and the cellular machinery decodes the mRNA sequence producing the spike protein. Our immune system identifies this as foreign and triggers an inflammatory response. Johnson & Johnson is known as a vector vaccine. COVID-19 spike protein genes have been added to a modified virus known as a vector. After injection, the modified virus infects the cells which then produce the spike protein. COVID-19 variants are showing increasing variability in the spike proteins, decreasing the effectiveness of current vaccines against future variants. Natural immunity occurs as a result of infection with COVID-19. During the infection, our body's inflammatory response targets multiple COVID-19 proteins. This inflammatory response can trigger a cytokine storm that can overwhelm our body and cause severe illness and even death. It is therefore imperative for those with underlying medical conditions such as obesity, diabetes, COPD, cardiovascular disease, immunocompromised immune systems, and our elderly to vaccinate as the primary way to acquire immunity against COVID-19. This is referred to as targeted vaccination of at-risk individuals. Both natural and vaccine immunity reduce the risk of severe illness in future infections. Natural immunity, however, better protects us against future variants. This is due to reduced mutations seen in the nucleocapsid proteins. Let's expand on the risks of vaccine and natural immunity against COVID-19. First, I would like to remind everyone that vaccines save lives. But as with any medical intervention, they are not without potential risks. We still do not know the full extent of long-term complications. In my practice as a family physician, I encourage those who are willing or those with risk factors to get vaccinated. Now on to the risks. In the 5 to 11 year age group, after 8.7 million vaccine doses, 4,000 non-serious events were reported. In addition, 100 serious side effects included high fevers, severe vomiting, 15 cases of myocarditis, 12 seizures, and 2 deaths. In the 12 to 17-year-old group, after 8.9 million doses, 9,000 adverse events similar to the younger population were reported, but also included 397 cases of myocarditis, primarily in boys. Over 520 million doses have been given to adults. The most concerning side effects included blood clots from primarily the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, myocarditis from the mRNA vaccines, again in males less than 30, Guillain-Barré syndrome from the Johnson & Johnson primarily, and anaphylaxis and death. Natural immunity, however, is not without risk. Over 850,000 deaths in the United States are attributed to COVID-19. In addition, many adults develop other complications, including, but not limited to, breathing difficulties, fatigue, brain fog, blood clots, headaches, palpitations, muscle and joint pain, dizziness, diarrhea, tingling, mood changes, loss of smell and taste, changes in menstrual cycles, and post-ICU syndrome. In children, the vast majority of COVID-19 infections are very mild. Some children require hospitalization due to severe respiratory illness. In addition, a small group of children develop multisystem inflammatory syndrome and myocarditis. Death in children is extremely rare and is almost always associated with pre-existing medical risk factors. So, which is better, vaccine or natural immunity? Several studies have looked into this. This week, the CDC published a large study comparing reinfection and hospitalization rates between unvaccinated, vaccinated, naturally immune, and combined. As you can see on the slide behind me, the data clearly shows that natural immunity to be superior to vaccine immunity. Combining both together did not significantly improve risk of severe illness during the Delta wave of 2021. The unvaccinated, unfortunately, and the non-immune suffered severely. Omicron is changing all of that. It is emerging as the dominant variant at this time and is 97% less deadly than its predecessors. With Omicron, we are seeing significant breakthrough infections despite triple and even quadruple vaccinations. Neither vaccine immunity nor natural immunity prevent all transmission or illness. When our goal was to prevent transmission, vaccination and multiple boosters made sense. Now, in light of Omicron, we should focus on reducing severity of illness with early treatments and targeted vaccination of at-risk individuals. Vaccinating people who are at low risk or those with natural immunity no longer makes sense. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Januka.
Thank you, Dr. Orloff. So the take-home message is there is a natural immunity as well as a vaccine-induced immunity, and there's a kind of question whether natural is better than vaccine-induced immunity or not, but either way, they both immunities work. And certainly, if you are high risk, you should get vaccinated, right? Okay. Does anyone have any comment about that? Any one of our panelists? So I don't know if you guys have mic, or can someone get us?
I think the other.
Yeah. Let's see if this.
I think one.
No, this is working or not?
I think.
So.
Can anybody hear me? That's better. Okay.
Yeah.
One other thing that's worth considering, and we don't really know the answers on this yet, answers will come over time, is the duration of vaccine versus natural immunity. Historically, exposure to a virus has given, if not lifelong, very long-lasting immunity, because the immune system has ways of remembering things that we don't routinely measure. Like just measuring antibody titers doesn't really give us an idea of someone's immunity. Right now, what we're seeing is that vaccine-induced immunity does have a lifespan. That varies. It may be that after the third or fourth shot, it lasts a long time. I think that the data is still coming in on that. So that's just one other point to bring up.
So if I could just comment on duration of immunity with regards to the natural immunity, there is some data that the SARS original coronavirus illness was studied, and 17 years after the people were exposed to SARS and recovered from it, they continued to have effective T cells. So it's a real strong argument towards natural immunity providing long-term benefits and protection.
Okay, does anyone else have a brief comment? I just want to keep this forum going. So does anyone have any comment, a brief comment, please? Okay, so we're going to move on to the next topic, but before we do that, I do want to mention that, as we had said earlier, we had invited our public health officers and infectious disease specialists, and they couldn't make it, but Dr. Karen Ramstorm, our public health officer for the county, was kind enough to record a video message, and I would love if we could play that, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Ramstrom, a Shasta County Health Officer. I'm not able to be there in person with you today, and quite honestly, I have some concerns about our high case numbers, so please be safe today. Okay, I was asked to share my thoughts with you. We are all tired of this pandemic, heaven knows, including myself. And I recognize and I strive to understand the frustration with changing information and direction as new knowledge has emerged. It's the nature of this virus and this event. I also have an inkling now that people in Shasta County don't like being told what to do. Who does, really? I know the mandates are a focus of the conversation today, and I hope people understand by now that these are not under our control locally. That said, I will tell you that health officers and public health leaders statewide continue to ask questions and encourage moderation in statewide policy, including vaccine requirements. It might be helpful to consider that as you are making decisions for yourself and your families, the policymakers are thinking about the whole population. Our physicians and other healthcare professionals know more than anyone the devastating illness and loss of life COVID has caused, not to mention the tremendous strain on our healthcare system. A big thank you to our healthcare workers. I can't say that enough. In my view, we need to use the prevention tools we have available to us to manage this virus so we can live our lives. Lastly, I would say that we as a community likely have more in common than not, and I hope we can bring compassion to our interactions. I wish you a meeting of health and healing. Thank you.
Thank you for Dr. Please, thank you very much for Dr. Ramstorm to record this message for us. We had asked other doctors also, and some of them really wanted to do it, but just because of some emergencies or the schedules, they couldn't do it. And please remember, this was a kind of a very impromptu effort on our part, and we have been asking for these forums for a long time, but finally it all got precipitated in last 10 days. So please bear with us if we have not done anything. We fall short of your expectations. So with that, I will bring you to the next topic, which is going to be treatment for COVID-19. How do you treat COVID-19 early treatment, not so much in the ICU care or ventilator care. And with that, we will go to Dr. Molatki. You are an expert in this. You have treated tell us how many few hundreds of these patients successfully, saving them?
Well, Paul tends to lay it on kind of thick. I started counting for some reason, and I was kissing on my 2-year-old grandson. I have his laryngitis, so I don't have the Rona. I started counting, and number 210 came to my house this morning to be treated for her COVID. So, yeah, it's a real thing, and been a scary thing. It's caused a tremendous unimaginable amount of collateral damage in my patient population from the fear. And so what I thought I'd do is I'd just tell you this little story about what happened to me. So when we first heard about this coronavirus, it was pretty apparent within the first couple of weeks to me that people were dying from this thing called the Cytokine Storm, which Dr. Orloff mentioned. And the Cytokine Storm is a little bit complicated, a little bit in the weeds, but humans are capable of 4 different types of allergic reactions. Most people have heard of anaphylaxis. That's where you eat the peanut and 10 minutes later your throat swells shut. Well, there are 3 other kinds of allergic reactions. Cytokine storm is a combination of number 2 and number 3. And it's kind of a overreaction when you get sick and your body knows it can't handle it. So it's really your own fault. Because if your immune system is not in shape, that's all you got. That's all you got for bacteria. Well, now we have antibiotics that help with that, but that's all you got. So if anything else comes out of this pandemic, it'll remind us to, take care of our immune system. So I've treated 30-year-old yoga instructors that were sick for 4 hours. They're like, so anyway, it turns out my son and my son-in-law, both of which are plastic surgeons, in February of 2020 were sort of out of the operating room because it was on elective procedures. And it begs the question, how come I don't look better? But 2 plastic surgeons in my family. So we were out on the lake catching bass, and I knew what was killing people. So I said, boys, this is the cytokine storm. All you got to do is give these people steroids early in the course of the illness, and they'll be fine. No one has to die from this. And both of them looked at me. About 20 years ago, most of the med schools started teaching that steroids are bad, don't do it. Now, there's a lot of liability associated with them. There's a fairly large number of side effects possible from them, and that's all true. But they said, Dad, you're old, nobody uses steroids. Don't do that. So I just started doing it anyway. And then very pleasurable, that's the end of February, the second Wednesday in April, breaking news, genius doctors discover cure for coronavirus. It's IV steroids. I forwarded them the email. So that's what I've been doing. I try to get my people to the office in the first 3 days of illness. Do not lay in your house and have someone slide a pizza under the door for a week. Do not. The analogy that I've been using is the cytokine storm thing is like a huge mountain covered with snow. And I'm at the top, and I make a snowball, and I roll it down that mountain. Halfway down the mountain, size of a car. If you let it get to the bottom of the mountain, size of a house. The doctor's job is to stop that snowball before it gets to be the size of a car. And steroids stop it right now. And it costs $10. So yeah, I mean, That's all I wanted to say.
That's a lot. That's very powerful. Less is more sometimes, right?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you put these patients on ventilators or. So certainly there are some more treatments nowadays. There are newer pills are there, or antibody. Just a quick mention of.
Yes,
them.
couple quick treatments. So other really good and effective early. Don't want to take someone else's thunder here, but the ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine you hear about, which are sometimes hard to get. It's been hard to get depending on political issues, I guess. But they help. They're the biochemical name for those substances. They're zinc ionophores. So they help your cells pull zinc into their cell membranes. Viruses hate zinc. It's like kryptonite for them. So if your cells in your mucous membranes where this virus has to enter, can't enter through your skin and your leg, has to enter here. If there's zinc on those cells, the virus will not enter. Used early, tremendous help. Just hard to get. There are also 2 drugs that are right now being reserved for people who are at high risk. They're kind of similar to the drugs we use for HIV, for those antivirals, and I can't write a prescription for them yet. So, but they're ramping up production of those too. I think by the time they're readily available, we won't need them. I think.
Well, thank you, Dr. Molatki. We also have Dr. Amy Quercetin here, who's going to also tell us what else can you do. So what else can the folks do to stay healthy, doctor?
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for coming out today. Thank you. So I'm Dr. Amy Quercetin. I've been an OBGYN in Reading for nearly 10 years. I've been a doctor for about 14. I was a nurse for 5 before that. I have a PhD in global health leadership. And I've also taken a special interest in functional medicine, which is kind of finding the root cause of disease and, fixing that. And I've been treating a lot of people outpatient with COVID. So, it's funny because I have in my notes, don't gloss over my topic as a puff piece. But everyone's talked about it so far, how important it is to take care of your immune system. So it's really important. Pay attention. This information could save your life. This is just keeping you healthy. This is how to prepare your COVID toolkit and also just how to stay healthy. So let's start with vitamin D. People with low levels of vitamin D, less than 20, were over 90% more likely to have severe COVID. People with people with vitamin D levels over 30 were more than 90% more likely to have mild symptoms, according to some studies. So I recommend that you go get your vitamin D level drawn, and then you can kind of dose your vitamin D appropriately. I did talk to my nutritional therapy friend, and she said, you know what? We are lucky in Reading because we have so much sun. You're much less likely to have a deficiency in vitamin D if you live in Reading. So Dr. Malaki also talked about this one. The next really important one to make sure you're taking is zinc. Zinc is the kryptonite that he was talking about. It helps block the virus from multiplying. And some drugs like hydroxychloroquine are not nearly as effective if they can't get zinc in, if you don't have zinc. So zinc is very important. You need to take 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams of elemental zinc. So zinc sulfate, 220 to 440 gives you the right dose. Vitamin C is the next one in the toolkit. Vitamin C is always a good idea. It's an antioxidant, has anti-inflammatory effects. So for every day, take 1,000 milligrams. But if you start getting sick, increase that dose to 3,000 milligrams. It's a good idea to divide it over 3 doses. And if you start having diarrhea, just back off on the dose a little bit. That's your body saying, a way of saying, hey, that's a little too much. So there's a supplement that's gotten more attention recently. It's called Quercetin, and it's a flavonoid, and it has antiviral properties. And when you take vitamin C and quercetin, it provides a synergistic antiviral effect. It works better. And so quercetin is a natural supplement that helps get zinc into the cells too, like hydroxychloroquine does. So this is really good. You can get it over the counter. The dose is 500 milligrams daily for prevention, and then you can take it twice a day if you're sick. The next one to have in your toolkit is Famotidine or Pepcid. It's an over-the-counter histamine 2 blocker that blocks stomach acid production. This is the first one that's not just a supplement. It's a medication over the counter, and it's been really useful in COVID-19. There was an anecdotal paper found very early on from Wuhan, China, that noted that patients who survived COVID were more likely to be taking Pepcid. They've also done more studies in the hospital setting, and they found that there was decreased severity and intubation when Pepcid was used. So the dose is 40 milligrams twice a day if you're sick. There's so many things over the counter that I could mention. I'm trying to just kind of take the highlights for you. Take an aspirin, 325 milligrams a day when you're sick because you're more likely to form clots with COVID. Make sure you have a pulse oximeter and a thermometer on hand. You don't want to get sick and then think, I wonder what my oxygen saturation levels are, because that's one of the things they talk about. If it drops into the 80s, that's time to go to the hospital. So other things just to stay healthy, you can take a daily B complex vitamin, and then magnesium. B vitamins and magnesium, they help so many processes in the body. And my favorite way to get magnesium, because if you take it orally, you can get diarrhea. If you take an Epsom salt bath, it's magnesium sulfate. It just goes through your skin. 3 to 4 cups in your bath, and you're going to get great magnesium. One last item for your COVID survival kit is an iodine nasal wash. This sounds kind of funny, I guess, but they have some commercially prepared ones that you can just squirt up your nose. The virus loves to live, right here in your respiratory tract, and you can just kind of kill it with that iodine nasal wash. There's a little recipe on the slide if you want to make your own or just get the commercially prepared ones. And then if you don't like iodine, then you can also use colloidal silver, just straight. You can squirt that in as well. You can also swish it around as a mouthwash. I got a lot of these things from a document called Home-Based COVID Treatment from the AAPS online. And I will see if we can get it posted to this website. I found it to be a really good resource. And also, if there are medications like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine that you would like to have in your toolkit and you can't find anyone to prescribe it for you, there are resources there of like telehealth places that you can go. I think it's not a bad idea if you look into those things and think they will be useful. I have found them to be useful. Then you can find a doctor and get your stash before you get sick. That's going to be the easiest way. So again, don't forget the basics. Eat healthy food, fruits and vegetables, stay away from processed food, get plenty of sleep, exercise, get out in the sun, decrease your stress levels. Obesity is a big factor in COVID. Lose weight. So many people are focused on the newest variant, but I propose that you need to focus on the host. Focus on yourselves. Get as healthy as you can be, and you'll be able to fight this thing. You got this.
Thank you, Doc. So, thank you very much. I really like the idea of Epsom salt bath. Does the insurance reimburse for that? Okay, so I just do want to clarify one thing that what these doctors mentioned. We physicians and the healthcare providers always have disagreement amongst ourselves. Doesn't mean that any one of us agree with anybody else opinions or the prescriptions of the treatment. But there are some of the options which are available to consider, and please consult your physician, consult your nurse practitioner, physician assistant, consult your healthcare provider to finally make a plan for yourself. But these are just some of the things. The other thing I would like to clarify is, if you have a weaker immune system, none of us are really blaming you for that. We're just saying that work on your immune system, exercise, diet, some of the things which you guys have mentioned, right? Is that fair to say, right? Anyone else has a comment? Otherwise, in the interest of time, we would like to move forward.
Just a couple comments. Thanks, first of all, Dr. Karenchis, for excellent advice. Appreciate it. Couple things to know. At this time of year, at our latitude, unfortunately, we don't have that much vitamin D occurring naturally. There's a great free app you can download for your phone. I assume everybody's got a phone. If you don't, then I'm surprised. It's called D-Minder, and it allows you to set goals and all sorts of fun things for vitamin D. But vitamin D is such a critically important vitamin, and we also know that the vitamin D that you take by mouth may work differently in your body than the vitamin D you acquire with sunlight. So take a look at D-Minder. You'll find at this latitude, at this time of year, we're mostly getting ultraviolet that will make D in your skin between like 11:30 and 1 o'clock or something. So just be aware of that. Therefore, it's a good idea to take supplemental vitamin D. You can spend all day outside on a sunny day like this in the winter and not get much vitamin D. The other thing, and I do not own stock in this company, but a pretty cool device for nasal washing is called Navage. I don't know if anyone's seen that. You can buy it online or at pharmacies, and it actually does a saline rinse. It pumps water in one nostril and sucks it out the other. And we know this virus comes in through your mucous membranes, and so if you want to avoid it or you think you might have been exposed, it might not be a bad idea to do the Navage with some povidone iodine. There was actually a study run in Reading earlier this year by Dr. Dome, one of our local ENTs, in conjunction with Stanford, where they were studying the povidone iodine or the betadine nasal washes, and I think the Navage device can make that a lot easier for people. So just a couple other little hints for you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward, right? Fast forward. Let's go. Next topic, which is on the mind of most of us, and it's extremely controversial. It's an extremely sensitive topic, and we need to show each other some grace and respect. But I would ask Dr. Mu to address that on vaccine mandates. This is going to be a discussion about the criteria and ethics of vaccine mandates. Dr. Mu, please.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Danuka. Thanks for joining us. And I know this topic is very controversial. So what I'd like to talk about, what qualifies and what are the criteria for vaccine mandates. So can I have first slide, please? There we go. All right. So there are times that certain things have to be done. And government, in order to protect us in some way, to mandate certain vaccine. But they do need to meet certain criteria. So I have 4 things here that has to be met to mandate something. Because when they mandate something, they're taking some of your rights away. They're taking some of your autonomy away. So this is not what I came up with. This is what I found reading different literatures. So let's go over them together. In order to mandate a vaccine for the infectious disease, it has to be very contagious and deadly. That's number 1. Number 2 is the vaccine is very safe and very effective. And number 3 is there are no other alternative treatment for this condition. And finally, number 4, the punishment for not getting the vaccine, is it appropriate? So the question is there an example that fits these criteria? Now, actually there is. Now, this involves some history. Now, I know some of you, when you hear the word history, bam, you go into comatose. But I'll try to make this very short and simple. So in 1905, the Supreme Court of the United States has stated that it is constitutional for the state, not federal government, but for the state government to mandate a vaccine. And in 1905 in Massachusetts, there was an outbreak of smallpox. And some of you actually, looks like you're old enough to have smallpox vaccine when you're younger, but most of you probably don't. You look kind of younger than the usual crowd. So the smallpox is a very deadly virus. The case fatality rate is 30%. But fortunately, at that time, they had a very effective vaccine that's 95% effective and very little side effect. Only about 1 person out of 1 million will die as a result of the vaccine. And also, at that time, it had 100+ years of experience. So it is very infectious and contagious, and vaccine was safe and effective for the smallpox. And at that time, there's no treatment for it. And finally, let's say you're back in 1905, you decided not to get the vaccine because I don't want it. What is the punishment? $5. Okay? Now, $5 in 1905 translated to today's money is about $150 to $160. Now, with current inflation, might be a little higher. But. So, now, let's talk about COVID-19 vaccine. Now, a disclaimer, I agree with Dr. Orloff and everybody else that these COVID-19 vaccine is very effective in preventing severe illness. And if you are high risk, you should really consider getting it. So let's talk about COVID-19 vaccine right now. Let's talk number 1. Oh, sorry, go back a little bit, please. Thank you. It is an infectious disease, very infectious, but in terms of, is it deadly? Well, we don't know exactly how deadly this virus is. The infection fatality rate could be anywhere from 0.2% to 1, maybe slightly higher. Now that's for all ages, everybody. If you're older, a lot older, 65 years and older, your fatality rate is a lot higher. And if you're younger, your survival rate is much better. There's a 1,000-fold difference. So this is primarily a disease for the elderly and also those who are immunocompromised. So compared to smallpox, the COVID-19 doesn't seem to meet the number 1 criteria. Perhaps the infectiousness, but not the deadliness. Now, number 2 is the vaccine effectiveness and safetiness. Let's talk about the effectiveness. Now, when the vaccine first came out, it was 95% effective in terms of you not getting the disease. It was almost like a miracle vaccine. But as time went on, the effectiveness gone down to 40 to 60% for Delta. And for Omicron, it's way down. If you have 2 vaccines, after 6 months, your chance of getting the Omicron is near 100%. If a triple vaccine is very close to it. Now, all of you, either yourself or you know somebody who's been double vaxxed, triple vaxxed, still get the disease, correct? Yep. So for the effectiveness in terms of transmission and getting the disease, this, to me, does not meet the criteria. And one of the sole purpose of mandating a vaccine is to stop the transmission so we could control and contain the disease. And unfortunately for Omicron, it does not do that. Now let's talk about safety next. Next slide, please. Now, when I first saw this is from VAERS report. I know this is very controversial, it's not very accurate, but this is all we have in United States data, unless we go outside, go to looking at European data. When I first saw this, I was kind of shocked. So if you look at the bottom, In the orange, that's all other vaccine in terms of adverse reaction. And if you look at way to the right with the blue, that number, reported events shot up to almost 100,000. Thank you, Dr. Orloff. Have you done Price is Right before? So let's say this is not really accurate. Let's say this is, in reality, it's only 10%. Even 10%, that's 100,000 cases, much higher than all the accumulated vaccine adverse reaction. Next slide, please. This is a reported death. Also very low in the orange part, and the blue part is a lot higher. Again, let's take 10% of that. That is still 2,000 death case, and that's still a lot higher than all the other vaccines together. Can we get back to the 4 criteria slides? Thank you. So to me, again, the COVID vaccine does not meet criteria number 2. And number 3, there are alternative treatments, like Dr. Amy and Dr. Richard Malaki have mentioned. We do have treatments for these things. And finally, the punishment. So, what's the punishment now? You lose your job. You lose your education. You lose everything that you have worked for all your life. Freedom. And your freedom. And do you really think the punishment fits the crime of not getting the vaccine? All right. Now, these criteria, there are other reasons why the mandate should not be applied to everybody. They have excluded people who already have natural immunity. Those folks, as you heard from Dr. Orloff, they have very good immunity. Compared to vaccine, at least equal, most likely much better than the vaccine immunity. So to me, those folks do not need the vaccine and should not be mandated to those folks. From a physician, I cannot understand why would I inject something into my patient's body if they don't need it. It just does not make any sense to me. Another reason why it's a bad idea to mandate or widely use a vaccine during a pandemic is it's a theoretical possibility. These, what we call single antigenic vaccine, they produce antibody for one antigen. And when you use that, what we call a leaky vaccine, some of you may know that term. If you don't, I guess you could Google it, DuckDuckGo it. When you use that vaccine for an unstable virus, when I say unstable, meaning that the virus mutates, and when you give that vaccine to an unstable mutating virus during a pandemic, you will select out vaccine-resistant virus. And is that what we're seeing right now? So that's another reason why it's not a good idea to mandate the vaccine. I think the vaccine should be reserved for who are a population who are at higher risk. And the children who are healthy should not be vaccinated, in my opinion. Now, I would like to give you a take-home message. Go back. Here's my summary. COVID-19 vaccines do not currently meet the criteria for vaccine mandate. Okay, can we all agree with that? Very good. Next slide. If these vaccines meet the new criteria for mandate, then every vaccine that exists now and the future could be mandated if they follow that logic. And that's not good. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. Thank you, Dr. Wu. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. So I gather the vaccines are good for high-risk people. We encourage it. They should take it. If you're a very close household contact, we definitely encourage it. The question is about the efficacy and ethics about the mass universal mandates, right? Just to clarify that, most of us have, I know all of us have actually promoted vaccination for a long time, childhood vaccination, meningitis vaccination, hepatitis vaccination. So we are not against vaccination, right? Is that a fair statement on everyone's part? But we do question the efficacy and ethics of this one in particular for mass vaccination mandates, especially for children. Okay, got it. All right, anyone else has a comment? Otherwise, the clock is ticking fast. Okay, so with that, we will go to the next topic, which is going to be, where do we stand now with this new variant, and what is the natural life cycle of viruses, and is there any light at the end of tunnel? Dr. Hamilton, please.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody showing up this afternoon on such a beautiful day. So I'm hoping here to provide you all with the fact that there is a light at the end of the tunnel for us. And hopefully it's not a train. So, as you all know, we're in the midst of this Omicron variant. The Omicron variant was identified in South Africa just not even 2 months ago. November 24th, I think, is when the World Health Organization named it. Started spreading rapidly through South Africa, rapidly into Europe, and interestingly, for the most part, seems to have burned out in those areas, if you will. In other words, case rates have gone down. What we've seen is decreased fatality with it compared to the other variants. And so overall, that seems to be a good thing. One can postulate that Omicron is, God's vaccine, if you will. It's going around giving people natural immunity. Now, it's a very different variant than what we saw when the first wave of Alpha was identified. The Omicron variant has somewhere between 30 and 36 mutations to its genetic sequence, and most of them are on the spike protein. You've all probably heard about the spike protein, and it turns out that in COVID, the spike protein is the thing that is one of the major pathogenic agents. When you get the spike protein in your body, it binds to the angiotensin-converting enzyme receptors in your lungs, and that's why people with severe COVID die oftentimes. They get very severe respiratory disease with this accompanying cytokine storm, as my colleagues discussed. Well, the good thing is it seems like those mutations to the spike protein make Omicron less likely to bind to the angiotensin receptors in the lung. It tends to stay in the upper respiratory tract, which is a good thing. That's what we know of as a URI. You've probably been to a doctor and they say, oh, you've got a viral URI. Well, URI stands for upper respiratory infection, and a lot of people call that a cold. Now, I say that not to minimize the fact that Omicron still has potential, still holds a lot of danger for people. And particularly, as my colleagues have mentioned, there is a population of people, there are individuals who have brittle diseases, diabetes, congestive heart failure, COPD, being in a particular age group or having other pulmonary problems and things, are still at very high risk, even though Omicron is relatively less severe on an individual basis. The other thing that makes it dangerous right now is it's everywhere. It is spreading, it has spread, as you'll see, very rapidly, and so it's just the sheer numbers. When you have that many people getting sick, it's gonna hit a lot of people. Next slide, please. So I pulled some data, and this is, we've been talking about this talk for a couple weeks now, and literally every day stuff changes. There's new data coming out nearly daily. But this is this came from the CDC website. They are the best we have at the moment in terms of tracking it in the US. And no more comments on that. But the good news is so the CDC has been tracking 7-day moving average of reported cases of COVID. Now,
this is a tough one, right? Because how many cases are there really out there, right? I mean, how many people went to Walgreens, bought a test kit, tested positive, and called the CDC and said, hey, I got a case? Any of you? I wouldn't even know the right number or the website. So, and how many of you know somebody who tested positive and were sick and didn't test? So it's very likely that this is underreported in terms of the number of true cases out there. I mean, we know that to be a fact. But the good news is it does appear, and we'll hope that it continues, that the Omicron wave may have peaked in the United States. You can see it's headed down, and it would have peaked last Wednesday. Now, that's a 7-day moving average, so looking back 7 days, they say, well, this was the last 7 days, and then, Thursday they look back 7 days, but it was 890,000 cases reported to the CDC. Now, I'm assuming that's from labs where you go down, like Lab 24 here, or Quest, or one of those places that actually publicly reports their data to public health departments, who roll it up to state health departments, who roll it up to the CDC. So the good news is it looks like we might be headed down with Omicron. Let me have the next slide, please. If we look at hospitalization data, and again, this is right off the CDC website, and this is as current as it gets. What's interesting to me, and I'm going to actually have you go to the next slide, please, is comparing these graphs side by side. So if you look in the early phase of the pandemic, in the alpha phase there, January of 21, or actually in January of 21, and then the delta phase, and look at the relative number of Omicron cases. So these are cases on the left, thank you, Dr. Orloff, and these are hospitalizations on the right. So look how much higher relatively the hospitalizations were early in the pandemic to the height of the spike of the cases. In other words, the spike of Omicron is, 5 or 6 times as high as the alpha wave, and yet the hospitalization peak is maybe 1.5 times as high. The other thing that we're starting to understand better is that the CDC has not yet aggregated all their data, and they admitted this a couple weeks ago, and it makes it hard to understand things, but of people who are hospitalized with COVID versus people who are hospitalized because of COVID. And the same is true with deaths. So I think all of us in medicine have anecdotes where patients went to the hospital and were told, you've got COVID, we're putting you in the isolation, and yet they were there for something else. Now, it doesn't necessarily decrease the burden on the healthcare system, because we still need to protect, healthcare workers from those patients. This is moving on me here. We still need to try to contain the disease to the best of our ability. But the good news is that overall, Omicron looks to be far, far less severe than prior waves. And so I think that really should give us all some hope. Now, if you were a virus and you were trying to decide which direction to evolve, and your goal was to infect as many people as possible, your goal would not be to kill your host. It would be to go out there and infect people and then jump to the next people. And that seems to be historically what's happened. So next slide, please. Actually, this is one last slide. This is regional data on Omicron. And this is just from December 1st. And as you can see, the blue is the Northeast. So Omicron wave appears to have peaked in the Northeast of the country. So New York, Connecticut, New Hampshire, all those places. The blue is going down. It's sort of moving westward across the country. We here in California are probably considered the West, I'm guessing. We're pretty far west. And it's coming down in the West too. So the good news is it looks like we've probably seen a peak of Omicron, and doesn't mean we don't need to watch out and be careful and all that, but it looks like it's headed down as it has in other countries. Other countries have responded by backing off on some of the mandates and restrictions, and we're hopeful that that could happen here at some point. Next slide, please. So the other question that I started looking at was, how do pandemics end? Like, is it when somebody stands up and says, it's over, have a party? One of the challenges, I think, of this particular event in our lives is nobody's really given us what the end game looks like. I think there's been an unstated goal that it's somehow going to be 0 cases. And I think the day it got out of Wuhan, that goal was not likely to be possible. So looking at historically, when pandemics end, is a little difficult because we have good records, and once again, history. There's a lot of information here to process, but typically, what happens in historic times is pandemics rage for a period of time, and it's anywhere from 2 to 50 years. If you look back to the time of the Black Plague, which was interestingly bacterial and not viral. And eventually, there develops sort of what we've talked about as that holy grail, that herd immunity, meaning the vast majority of the population has some level of immunity, whether that's natural or vaccinated, we can talk about. And eventually, these diseases become endemic. So next slide, please. We've only actually been successful, and obviously we've only been as technologically advanced as we are for a few hundred years now, but we've only really truly supposedly eradicated one disease, which is smallpox. And that, it turned out, was not easy, but as Dr. Mu discussed, it was a very safe vaccine. It was a very high case fatality rate, so people who got it died. A lot of them died, so it was easy to not have to worry about it spreading quickly. And we've pretty much found that there are no other diseases we've ever been able to eradicate, and particularly things like coronavirus, which has an animal reservoir. I don't expect we'll ever eradicate coronavirus off the planet. In fact, a couple years ago, you got a cold, and there was a reasonable chance it was coronavirus. There's a number of viruses that circulate and cause the so-called common cold, amongst them coronavirus, rhinovirus, RSV, parainfluenza, adenovirus. And that's why doctors just tell you it's viral, because we mostly didn't have the testing to know, and honestly, it mostly didn't matter. Next slide, please. So there have been several pandemics in the 20th century. Probably the one that is most parallel to the coronavirus one was the great 1918 flu pandemic, and that killed 50 million people. That was a huge, coronavirus is not looking anywhere nearly as bad. So we've made some major strides. Whether or not you like what we've done or what we do, we've made some major strides. But ultimately, it ended. It took about 2 years to burn out. It apparently decimated the troops during World War I. And the sense is that it was a combination of the virus mutating and widespread exposure and natural immunity, eventually leading to it becoming endemic. And that's why we have a flu season every year, right? It keeps coming back. And by the way, why does flu get worse in the winter? Anybody know? Dr. Correntius knows. Your vitamin D levels are low, and we're all inside together. So, combination of things. So, another plug for vitamin D there. The other interesting thing when you ask when does a pandemic end is because nobody really knows from a medical standpoint when that last case of coronavirus will be the last case of the pandemic, and now we call it endemic, is it's cultural. They've looked back, historians have looked back, and for example, the decision with there was a decision to sort of move on from the 1918 flu pandemic. And one of the things they say, for example, is there are lots and lots of memorials to all the lives lost in World War I, but almost no memorials to all the lives lost by the influenza pandemic. And it was almost like a societal decision to say, we're done, we're moving on, we're moving past this. So I think in a couple of years, we may look back and realize that, it ended, it just kind of died out, and it was partially a social and cultural decision to move forward. And I think, honestly, a lot of people have kind of made that decision in their heads. That's a tough one because obviously there's still danger, but I think we all have to think for ourselves. And finally, last slide, I think. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I think that's the message here. Widespread infection is relatively less virulent with Omicron. We have vaccines, and as we've learned, there are risks and benefits, and like any medical treatment, they should be applied individually in consultation with your healthcare provider, your physician, because people have different risks, and that's just kind of a lesson that I think we're all learning. Public health and lifestyle interventions and early treatments are shown to be effective. One of the things we're learning in this pandemic is that some old drugs that are being repurposed, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, fluvoxamine, Pepcid, and steroids, for example, inhaled budesonide, things like that, have some effect, and also obviously some supplements, some of that functional medicine stuff that turns out to be very, very important to our health. We do have some excellent pharmaceutical treatments now. I mean, whatever you may think of Big Pharma, they've brought us some amazing treatments and some miraculous things. We have monoclonal antibody treatments. Some are better at Omicron than others. We have 2 new medications approved by the FDA that are oral medications that look very promising. I think they're very hard to get and very expensive right now. So I think the lesson from this is, you know, early in the pandemic, doctors were told or were saying, hey, you know, go home until you're really sick and then come to the hospital. Now we're learning that there are things you can do early, so do them. Take great care of yourself. Do your best to maintain your health. Jump on board with some of these early treatments, and I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel. My hope is that we end 2022 very differently than we started it. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. What a great conversation. So just to summarize, coronavirus is real. It's affecting all of us. It has affected all of us, and but we can't get rid of it completely, most likely, and we should not make the treatment of the disease worse than the disease itself. So let's not shoot ourselves in the foot, right? That's what you're saying. And part of that is fear, so we don't have to be fearful of it. We don't have to isolate ourselves and be fearful and not treat early and not get out of the home. We can find a balance as we have done as a human society for thousands of years. So we have much better tools than we had 100 years ago. We don't have to fear it. Fear is our enemy, right? Is that the message which everybody feels? So with that, unless you have any comments, any one of you, I would like to conclude this session, and we can go on to a short break. But before I do that, I do want to encourage every one of you to really put your thoughts on the index cards, ask the panelists some questions. We will bring them back after the second session. Second session is going to be 15 to 20 minutes, not too long, and then we will bring them back, everyone on the stage. You can write your questions on the index cards, give it to them. They are circulating with you guys. I really encourage you to that. Other thing, the housekeeping, please. If you can go to the website, sign up for the email list for future, if you can be kind enough to put the email something on the display. So with that, we will take a 10-minute short break, and then we are already really running late. I do want to mention that we had invited our elected officials in the area, all of them, to not to speak, but to kind of be part of the community and see what the experience in the trenches is. And I do see some of them are here. I would just recognize Mr. Doug LaMalfa, our congressman. He has been here. Thank you. And I do see Patrick Jones, supervisor here. We had invited every one of them, and I'm not sure I see anyone else. Please identify yourself if I'm missing someone in this large crowd. Really, you guys have exceeded my own expectations. You really filled this auditorium pretty much. And any other elected official here? No. Okay. Anyone? I'm sorry. City of Anderson, and louder, please. We're not. What's your? Mike Gallagher. Please give him a hand. I think it's so important for our elected officials to come to these kind of town hall kind of things and hear the public out before they make any policy decisions. So with that, I would ask you to take a quick break, maybe 7 minutes. We're only short on time, and be back in 7 minutes. We'll have a new panel in that time. Thank you.
Good job.
If you could all take your seats. We're trying to get back to running on time here if we can. If you have filled out a card with a question, you can put it over here on the table. Okay? If you filled out a card with a question that you want to ask one of the doctors, you can put it over here on the table. That's fine. If everybody could take their seats, we're going to get rolling here. Next up, we're going to be talking about how the pandemic, how COVID-19, how this whole thing has affected children and education. And I think all of us value our children more than anything else in this whole world. And it's important that we talk about this. We're going to get started in just a minute, so if you could take your seat, that'd be great.
Okay. Are you guys ready to start again? So I am going to ask my dear friend Krista here to help me run this second part here, please. And we're going to talk more about education and children on this side of the break. It's going to be a shorter one. We don't have enough time. We're going to rush because we want to go into QA session as well. So Krista, please take. I do want to remind before we go, I do want to remind people that you can still write the questions. Okay, just quick thing. And do you want to run a survey? That we want to know who is in the hall right now, whether you are a healthcare professional or whether you are a educator or parents or somebody wants to run a survey. Aaron, do I see you somewhere? Well, maybe he just stepped out. Okay, maybe a little later. So, okay. So if you guys can go to menti.com and put this code or use the QR code on your phone and look at this, zoom on to it. We have a couple of questions, so I'll give you a couple of minutes to see if you can do that. Okay, just for maybe a few more seconds, and then we'll go into the survey mode. This is the part, right? You're going to say these questions. Okay, do you want to go to the questions now? I know some people may join a little as they're clicking on it. Okay, so if you could please answer this question just for our curiosity and see what's the participation type here. And I know it does not reflect everyone because not everyone, I'm sure, is on the cell phone and entering the information. Some people may have stepped out, but just to get some sense. So far, community members are winning. All right. All right, that is what called participation. Okay, let me give it like 30 more seconds or so to see what the response is. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I in your way?
I was thinking that too.
Okay. Shall we go to the results now? Because we got to keep moving. Okay. Skeptical. I really want to know from the people who are skeptical, because the reason is science is based on skepticism. We welcome that. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. That's how we come up with the new ideas. Otherwise, the earth would still be flat, right? So skepticism is the welcome thing.
I would add a curiosity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and if someone is anxious, please just want to make sure that you feel comfortable and safe here. So I think that's a pretty good sample. We got to keep moving. So I would ask Krista to please introduce our next panel.
Yes, so we'll have a brief panel with some members. We've got some educators and also, I don't have their names right here. Yes, I do. Can I welcome up Dr. Trago, please?
Dr. Craig Traugott.
I'm sorry, I pronounced it wrong. Trago. How do you say it again?
Now, I bet a large number of people in this hall have seen Dr. Traugott as a child. I mean, he's still young, but many of you have seen him as a child, or he has taken care of your children sometime in last 40 years. He's been the chief of medical staff at Mercy in past and highly reputable pediatrician. Please, Dr. Traugott.
And invite up Patricia Bay, please.
So Dr. Patricia Bay is a psychologist. She has a long experience in child abuse care for the children who have been abused before, as well as she has her own radio show, which I'm sure many of you are a fan of. It's called Therapy in a Nutshell, right? It's a nice show that will help you. And anything else I missed? You said something about the website you have, right?
I really didn't listen to what you said.
Oh, okay, all right. Nobody does. All right. Okay. Thank you. So Dr. Patricia Bay. And we also have two educators and parent representatives who have been involved very intimately with the community event. So we have asked them to present the current status of the mandates and the impact on the children briefly. So would you please welcome
Marty Reid and Katie Gorman.
Katie Gorman. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the stage. And I apologize because I may be rushing you. It's not my intent, and it's not anything personal. It's just because we want to focus a lot on the question answers. So let's just get into it. Krista, please.
All right, the first question, you said Traugott.
Dr. Traugott.
Dr. Traugott. Okay, I'm the pressure of being back in the classroom and seeing children on the roll sheet and like, how do I pronounce their name? Anyway, how bad is COVID-19 for children?
Yeah.
Yes. Here.
And I would also ask Dr. Trogert, how bad is it, and what's the role of vaccination in them, and how does this vaccination compare to the other childhood vaccination? A lot to pack, Dr. Trogert.
So, a couple things. I want to make some corrections about things that were said earlier. One is, it was mentioned that we have 2 vaccines that are approved. We do not have 2 vaccines that are approved. We have 1 vaccine that's approved. We are currently not receiving that vaccine, at least as far as I know, that the vaccine that's been approved by BioNTech is not being used yet. It was not available, and the one that is being used is still Pfizer. So that was one correction. The other with VAERS, the vaccine-associated reports that we were talking about up here and giving that data, you need to know that that's underreported as opposed to too high a report. There's 2 studies that show that at least it's underreported by 1 to 10%. Am I in the wrong spot? Sorry.
We want to hear you.
So the VAERS reporting system is also not overloaded with people that want to gripe. 70% of those that report to VAERS are medical personnel and healthcare providers. So it's not just a scapegoat and a area where people that want to complain about the vaccine. So there is real reason to believe the data. So let's go on to the issue with children. Is this virus as dangerous to children as we first thought? Because we just first thought it was dangerous to everybody. We were going to see refrigerated trucks at the doors of all the hospitals where the dead bodies were going to be brought out, and that never came to be. And the fact is that children, many of you know about Legos. Anybody have Legos in their house? Well, we know that in those blocks, they have to be snapped together. When I was a kid, and that's old enough to have a smallpox vaccine, and to have shaken hands with JFK, that's how old I am. So the fact is my blocks were little wooden things that fell down, they didn't hold together. Well, so let's use the Legos method for discussing COVID. In order for COVID virus to get into our cells and to cause us illness, it has to attach to something on the cell. And that cell, people mention what's called the ACE2 receptor. And so the spike protein, actually those things look like like COVID, so all those numbers coming up. But nonetheless, the spike protein attaches to the cell and then does its magic and goes and is taken inside the cell. In order to have that go in, you need to have that ACE2 receptors. Good thing, children don't have that ACE2 receptor, certainly not in infancy. They do not have it, and the numbers increase as they get older. That's why as we get older, we're more likely to be affected by the disease. Children were not affected. And in fact, when they looked at the research studies, they showed that the risk of death from COVID in children was 0 to 0.02%, almost non-existent. Those that died were probably those that had severe comorbidities, just like with the adults. So the children were not affected by this. Well, what about the vaccine then? I mean, do we need to be giving kids a vaccine that contains things that we don't know? And one of the things I mentioned is Pfizer does not want you to know what's in their vaccine for 55 years. And when was JFK assassinated? 59 years ago. So that was before most of you were born. And the fact is that they want to hold off on telling us what they're injecting in our children for 55 years. That's absurd. We should immediately say absolutely not and deny the ability to do this to our children. And And anybody that knows or ever came to my office knew that I was not against vaccines, other than the cost. They cost a huge amount of money. But the fact was that this is not a vaccine that I'm supportive of at all. So we look at this vaccine and how was it studied? Well, they took 4,000 to 5,000 people and they studied well people, okay, 16 years to 64 years that were healthy. They did not study anybody 65 and older, the highest risk group. They did not study anybody 16 or younger, the lowest risk group. They did not study pregnant women, women that wanted to be pregnant. They did not study people with lung disease, asthma, or allergies. So they based their report then on people that were healthy. That's not a very good study. And when they took these people and they made this effectiveness of the vaccine 95% effective, where'd that number come from? Well, they selected out about 200 people. Maybe I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was only a small percentage of those that were actually studied, and they then reported 95% efficacy. So and anybody that would contradict that was censored or shut down. Now there was a British Medical Journal, which is a better journal, as well as some of those that are mentioned for other reasons. But the British Medical Journal had a head editor, who said, "You're showing us the results of 200 people when you had 4,000 people." And so he went and reviewed this data again, along with other reviewers, and they found that the efficacy was actually 1%. So when you took all of the people that were studied, this efficacy was just not there. Now, there are other studies and there's other data, and we're not getting all the data that we probably need, but we need to suspect things when the real data is not released and when we're being asked to believe something that they won't let us know, won't tell us what's in it, and it has potential of harm. So let's look at the kids. There have been children that have died from COVID. There's no question about it. But like I said, most of them had comorbidities. One of the things that we had concern about is that children were being given a diagnosis of death from COVID when indeed they died with COVID, and that, as mentioned by some of the other panel, they did not die because of the infection. They died for other reasons. So numbers are not totally reliable, and that obviously is bad, especially when we're talking about children. So why would we then want to take a material that contains genetic material, and this genetic material is not found in nature? They'll tell you it's messenger RNA, but in order to get it to work, it had to be modified in such a way that it is not represented in nature, either in this virus, any other virus, or in human beings. So we now they're asking us to inject our children with a genetically modified virus and by doing that, we are potentially causing generational concern for their well-being, because we don't know what the long-term effect is. We have limited studies on that, and we are endangering our future generations. So one of the things we also have to know is that this hasn't always been the case with vaccines, all right? And to say that we need a vaccine, I didn't get a lot of vaccines because I had the diseases. I had measles, I had mumps, I had rubella. And I confirmed that by having blood tests done when I worked at a hospital in South Dakota. And they said, well, you've got to get a vaccine. I said, no, I don't. I said, we'll measure it and I'll show you that I have those diseases. So to take people that have had COVID and mandate that they have the vaccine that's sinful. And to take children who have gone through this Omicron, and which is like the doctor said, a cold, and recommend that and mandate that they get a vaccine that has not been studied also is sinful. So I think that's all that I'm going to say right now. And I will be back.
Thank you. Thank you. So, of course, there are always some different opinions, and Dr. Traugott is a very valuable opinion, but also it doesn't mean that nobody should get vaccine amongst the children, right? Maybe somebody needs it and all that, but that's something just... So, we're going to go to Dr. Patricia Bay, and I'm hoping that Dr. Traugott can come back for the next conference sometime in future when we can have more conversation about the children and the vaccination. So Dr. Patricia Bay, could you please talk about how the psychological impact on the children is in this COVID?
Yes, thank you for having me here today. I want to give you a case example, and I'd like to tell you this is rare, but it's not. 10-year-old boy is talking to his parents. He's getting more and more depressed and upset. His parents, really wonderful parents, educated, nice people, sitting and talking to him, saying, what's going on? What's the matter? And he finally says to them, he just wants to die. And so he had come to see me a couple years before when there was a death in the family, and he was struggling with it. And the parents both kind of went, oh, it's just stressful. And he said, no, I want to die. And so when they asked him, do you have a plan? And he said, yes. And then he said, I want to go see Dr. Patty again. They called me. I got him in right away. This 10-year-old, good student, straight A's, sports, lots of friends, great in school, had lost his sports team, wasn't seeing his friends, was locked at home. He was doing distance learning, which he hated with a passion. His grades plummeted. And he got to the point where he just wanted to die. And the only thing that really saved this child, because his suicide plan would have been effective, let me tell you that. The only thing that saved him was he had 2 parents that asked him how he felt and listened. And when he asked for help, they responded. So I would like to tell you that depression in our children is rare. It is not. Our children are getting anxious, depressed, they're lost. They're losing things that we all had, that our older kids had, who are now graduated. There are college kids who can't go to their college unless they're willing to do the mandated vaccines and the booster and the booster and the booster. And they are losing out on their college experience. Picture the senior in high school who's been looking forward to prom for 4 years. Picture the senior in high school who's really relieved that prom is canceled because they're anxious and they're shy. Picture the 4th grader who has always been worried that they're not going to get invited to the birthday party. And now they don't have to worry about it because all the birthday parties were canceled. This is not good for our emotional development of our children. It is not good for shy kids who don't have to kind of push themselves and get out there. It is not good for our kids on the spectrum who have sensory issues, who cannot stand the masks and get yelled at and yelled at and yelled at for futzing with their masks. The overall thing that's happening with quarantine, with forced masking, with distancing, with sitting outside on the cement to eat lunch because they're not allowed to stay in the classroom or stay in the cafeteria to eat lunch. This is really hard on our children. And I am seeing depression, anxiety. I'm seeing kids lose their hair. Kids that are developing rashes on their face are breaking out from their masks. And this is stressful for kids. This is really stressful, and it worries me. It worries me. So what I want you to look at real I've made a list of what I see. Isolation from peers, loss of extracurricular activities, canceling of sports, normal rites of passage are canceled, like proms and graduation and school dances and the school choir and the magical dinner and the Club Cougar and the Victorian dinners, canceled. And these are these kids' opportunities to grow, all right? Loss of scholarship opportunities for some of these kids that were supposed to be looked at by scouts to go to college. Online school, boring, no motivation, and kids say to me, what's the point? This is ridiculous. Next slide, please. So the added home stress, the homeschool taught by parents who are trying to juggle homework and homeschool, and they really don't want to be their kid's teacher because, boy, the fighting that's happening in families. There's a lot. Shy kids hiding behind a mask, it's not good for them. Diminished skills on recognition of facial emotions, depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. These things are happening in children with all of these regulations and all of the mandates. As a psychologist, I'm extremely worried about it, and I know as parents you are too. If you need help, don't hesitate. I think the next slide says how to get some help. If you or someone you know is struggling, if you want to email me, I will help refer you to somebody who maybe takes your insurance, or you can get into somebody. My podcast is free. It is Dr. Patricia Bay, Therapy in a Nutshell podcast. There's 120 episodes on anxiety, depression, children, conflict resolution, communication. You think of it, look down the list. If it jumps out at you, you probably need to listen to it. Okay, thank you for having me, and let's protect our kids.
Thank you. A year ago, I spoke in front of Board of Supervisor, and what prompted me was this, that, I'll get out of my moderator mode right now. I'll express my strong emotions about this and my strong opinion about this. What we have done to our children is unpardonable. In last 2 years, it's a crime. It's a crime. Because there's not the physical scars, those are the emotional scars on the heart they cannot even show to any one of us. This is absolutely criminal on a part of our society to do this to our children. You better stop now. Okay, that's off my chest. With that, we'll bring Katie Gorman to tell us about the current status of education mandates. And please, Katie. Katie, for those who don't know, many people may know her, but she also was at the forefront of speaking up for the children, and she organized a big walkout.
Hi, I'm a kindergarten teacher, have my master's degree in education, and quite a bit under my belt with early childhood. So, sorry, out of breath. So, you feel like you've been on a roller coaster with these guidelines changing all the time. Well, this one is, I think since January, it's really enough to just, we've just been spinning. We can't even keep track. So we started coming back from break with a whole new set of guidelines, and Friday I heard about a whole new set of guidelines, so I had to take my talk today and throw it right there in the trash and get a whole new one. So what we're operating under, and I can say not all school districts are doing this, some are sticking to the old ways of doing this, but there's hope, because what they're doing now is called group contact tracing. If a child tests positive in a class, the rest of the class will receive a note stating that they are recommended to get tested on the 5th day, and they could remain in school. So that's a really big one, and we're so happy about that. No more 6 feet for 15 minutes, and then that's it. Your child's out for 10 days and no more education, or maybe just here's a packet. So that's really good. For staff, unvaccinated staff or unboosted staff still have to go out if contact traced for the 5 days, but they can test and come back on the 6th day. So universal masking is still in effect in our schools, and children as young as 2 years old are required to wear masks indoors, not outdoors. There, as a teacher, there's some things that I wanted to bring up that I've seen. I looked it up, and it's something that it's just not just me. Gemma Pediatrics says that children who were born during the pandemic scored lower on developmental tests, and they're blaming masks. And then the other one was Brown University. Their big headline was face masks do harm children's development and significantly reduce their development. One quick thing too brought up by Dr. Dela Cruz with Doctors Hospital, and something I've also seen is children with the rash she's speaking of is called impetigo. The reason we know it's from the mask, it's in a perfect shape of the mask. The children have a terrible rash across their face, and it gets up into their nose and causes cracks in their nose, and their nose will bleed. It also can be contagious, and it's the moisture underneath the mask that is creating a perfect environment for this. So I feel like we're moving forward. There's hope. Things are changing. And I also just want to say that we really, really need to get these masks off of our children. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you. And you guys can take some of the credit for easing those mandates back. Thank you. So the final speaker we have is Marty Reid. I'm sorry to rush everyone, but we really want to go into Q&A session. So I apologize to you, Marty. You are next, but I'm just trying to keep on the time. Please. So Marty's going to talk about protecting equal education, that how mandates have affected the children's actual purpose of being in school, that is education.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm probably the least qualified person on stage today, so I'll keep it brief.
Well, let me just say about Marty. Marty's an English teacher, and again, he corrects my English all the time.
All right, so I want to talk about academics and how the policies have affected academics. The news is reporting that graduation rates have only dropped by 0.6%. In the COVID era, and that number, I believe, is wildly inaccurate because it mischaracterizes what's really going on. When the shutdown occurred in early spring of 2020, many schools, including my district, stopped giving assignments for credit. Instead, the only work assigned was supplemental, optional work that was extra credit work, and students could get bonus extra credit for it to bring their grades up. Very few students did this work, and excuse me, graduation rates stayed about the same. I have natural immunity, it's not COVID. And I can prove it. Excuse me. So many students didn't do this work, but graduation rates stayed the same. And they said, look, graduation rates are fine. The kids are doing fine academically, right? Well, that's artificial. In the next year, many schools were in hybrid format. In this county and the rest of California, they were all online. We had kids 2 days a week in my school for 7 months out of the school year, and they were online for the rest. Every teacher I spoke to that year admitted to lowering their standards, reducing their standards so that more kids would pass. So the grades, the graduation rates stayed about the same, but they learned less. They achieved less. They didn't get the same quality education they had before the mandates. So that's a concern for me as an educator, seeing the quality of education diminish as the mandates go on. A brief comment about masking. I do believe that English language learners and Students with learning disabilities are impaired in their education by masking. Another thing is that I've noticed the masking policies have driven a wedge between some students and their educators, and relationships are absolutely important in education. Many studies show that the better the relationship between the kid and the educator, the more they achieve. And so that's a relational barrier between kids and their education and their educators. Vaccination policies, I know I have 2 seconds. I'm sorry, I'm going to go over.
Sorry, just go ahead.
Vaccination policies in the past have kind of incentivized kids to get vaccinated because they could remain in school and participate in sports. The policies have changed to be less discriminatory now, which is a good thing, but in the past it did basically discriminate against unvaccinated children, and I had kids in my class who had recovered from COVID, many of them, so I assumed they had naturally acquired immunity, and they were contact traced 3 or 4 times throughout the school year, which means every time they're contact traced, they're out of school for 10 days and out of clubs and sports. So that, based on what the panel before us said in the last session, just doesn't make scientific sense to ignore their natural immunity and also to keep contact tracing them. And then the last comment I have is the future of mandates. The mandate the governor announced on October 1st will probably go into effect July 1st, which means no child in California will be able to get an in-person education unless they have the COVID vaccine. And I know everyone loves distance learning, right? So we want to avoid distance learning if we can, right? We want to have in-person education for all children, and that's a big concern for me. Okay. My last comment is the childhood years are a crucial time in life. We all know this, and I know this as an educator. And I think the policies are generally hurting their education, their social development, their confidence, relationships, and more. So, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. This is horrible. Like we healthcare workers are mandated to vaccinate and boost us. We may agree or disagree with it, but we are adults, we can handle it. But what we are doing to our children is simply a crime. They are asking them to pay a price, that's why I'm here today to get involved in this. Anyway, let's move on. I know we are running half an hour behind, so you may or may not want to stay. What we have now is going to be going into Q&A session. We hope to run for 45 minutes. Some of you may like to leave, and that's okay. I do have some of the physicians and the medical providers and healthcare workers who want to circulate a declaration which they have been working on. I want to give them the opportunity to read that, and you may or may not agree with that and may choose to work on it later. However, I just want to tell you that there is no official endorsement from any of the physician or forum from here at this point for that. But if I may invite Dr. Kathy Reschke and Dr. Curtis Wong to read the declaration, and we will invite you all back. You can stay here. We're going to invite all other people also to the forum.
Hello. Hello. My name is Dr. Kathy Reschke. I'm an emergency room physician over 20 years and am transitioning into telehealth. And my colleague here,
Curtis Wong. I've been here since 1992, and I'm a plastic surgeon.
we wanted to read a declaration. The healthcare providers got together and created a declaration of what our positions are at the moment. So it says, as medical providers and healthcare workers of Shasta County, California, we hold the following beliefs. Number 1, COVID-19 Okay, there we go. COVID-19 is a disease that has massively affected our lives, our family, our economy, our nation, and the world.
We believe in the appropriate use of COVID-19 vaccines, which may reduce the severity of the disease. However, we do not support COVID-19 vaccine mandates because they do not prevent infection nor transmission.
Number 3, at this stage in the pandemic, we do not believe in a one-size-fits-all approach and believe the COVID-19 vaccines and boosters need to be tailored appropriately. COVID-19 vaccines should be encouraged for those who are at higher risk and who do not have naturally acquired immunity.
The majority of medical research demonstrates that naturally acquired immunity to COVID-19 is effective and sustained, as was demonstrated earlier today.
Number 5, there are effective early treatments for COVID-19. The public should be well informed about these options, which should be readily available.
We believe in the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship and the ethical principle of informed consent. Both of these are foundational to the practice of medicine and are undermined by these mandates.
Number 7, we are deeply concerned about the negative physical, psychological, and social impacts of mask and vaccine COVID-19 mandates on children.
And we are against mandating mass COVID-19 testing of asymptomatic people because it produces anxiety, disrupts our society, and is not medically necessary.
Number 9, we believe that open and free scientific discussion is foundational to the advancement of medicine and public health. Medical providers should be able to freely speak and freely and openly about their medical opinions without threat of reprisal by their employer or licensing board.
And last, we believe that no child or adult should be mandated to take a COVID-19 vaccine and or booster in order to attend school, retain employment, travel, or participate in society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy. Thank you, Mama. I want to just tell them where to go to sign up. Tell them where to go to sign up.
If anybody out there is in agreement with what we have just discussed, these 10 points, if you were to go to our website and sign in and identify yourself as a healthcare worker, a doctor, or an interested community provider or member, please go to our website and you can actually click on a link and sign our petition, not petition, but what we stand for. Thank you.
Even I guess you're inviting even the public to sign it, and they can identify themselves as healthcare workers, but even if they are not, they could still sign it, right? Okay. Okay, so in the interest of time, we'll be moving on, inviting all our panel back to the stage. So we may not have enough chairs here right now, but and we will be going over the questions and answers. Before we do that, I do want to remind everyone to please sign up for the email if you could, and that'll give you the information for the future. If you want to sign and agree with any statements, please go ahead. If you want to participate in future forums, please do that. And also, I want, at this point of time, some of you may want to leave sooner, so I want to make sure that I thank each and every one of you for coming here today, participating in. This is the civic discourse, which we should have done probably 2 years ago, a year ago. And I have asked for it for a long time, wanted this for a long time, but better late than never. I also want to thank the host who supplied us with this large auditorium where people could feel comfortable if needed with the social distancing. All the panelists to participate, all the medical providers, and all the organizers and volunteers, and each one of you. So let us go into the question and answer. And if I may start with the first one, and Krista will read some of them, and I'll try to read some of them. The first one, which is very relevant today, is about the testing. So, and someone actually probably read my mind and asked this question: is it necessary to swab weekly when you're asymptomatic, whether you're naturally immunized or vaccinated, or what is the concern with that? What's the benefit? What's the cost? What's the risk? So who wants to take that question? Yeah.
Thank you. So the question is, do we really need testing? Now, it depends on what the situation is. If we're in the very, very early stage and we still think that we could contain this virus, maybe testing, tracing could isolate them and eventually get rid of the virus. But we all know that that's way beyond what's going on right now. This virus is here to stay. It will continue to mutate into different forms, and we're going to get it over and over again throughout our lives. So testing asymptomatic population does not make any sense. It does not. So what we should do is go back to what we did before. If you're sick, you have symptoms, stay home or go see a doctor. If you're not sick, you don't have any symptoms, just go about doing your business.
Yes. And I would like to speak to that testing thing briefly too, because so the PCR test, polymerase chain reaction thing, if you can make anybody be positive, you can make a mango be positive if you run the cycle enough. So, and I just want to just quick tell you this because it happened in my practice, because people are freaked out, and the more freaked out they are, the more tests they buy. So one of my patients was exposed because she heard that one of her neighbors had COVID, and she had been in the Walmart at the same time. You can't make it up. She bought 6 tests. She did a test. It was positive. The next 2 tests were negative. The next 2 tests were positive, and the last test was negative. And that was over a 2-day period. So the thing to remember about the testing is that it's almost worthless. 30% false positive, 20% false negative. We don't use tests unless we have 95% sensitivity, 95% specificity. This test isn't even close. Plus, right now, there are 5 circulating coronaviruses, human coronaviruses, not a bat coronavirus. There are 5 human coronaviruses that will all give you a positive test on your home test. Oh, good.
I have one thing to say to this. These tests are extremely expensive. Follow the money.
I must moderate that a little bit, that in situations when it is valuable, tests may be valuable. But one thing I would say is this, that there are very, very few tests which are allowed to be sold over the counter without a physician's prescription. And I'm actually surprised that this is going on without any physicians or a healthcare provider's prescription. Well, and that has its own risks.
Yeah, fear is the mind killer.
Yeah. Fear, anxiety, going down the wrong path, you may miss a diagnosis because you think you have COVID, you may have something else. So that is a possibility.
Yeah, when I have people come to the office and they say, oh, I tested positive already, I test people in my parking lot. I'm not against testing. Often it's reassuring for the patients, but the decision whether you have COVID or not is what we call a clinical decision. If it quacks like a duck and waddles like a duck, and if you kill it and eat it and it tastes like a duck, it's a duck.
So our objection is we are okay with the testing as a clinical tool, but not as a political tool. Okay. Krista, you want to read the next question, please?
What are your thoughts on budesonide nasal spray? Does that help?
I just want to remind the panel, in the interest of time, it's 4:16, so we got to just keep it brief and please. I'm the bad guy. Blame me later. So who's taking it?
Oh, I could answer that one. Yeah. I use budesonide in my practice. I think it helps decrease inflammation, and we know that steroids work, so I think it may be useful.
Okay.
Okay. Is, first of all, does this virus enter the eyes, and is there any treatment for the eyes?
Well, yeah, the virus enters any mucous membrane, and it's on the receptor, the ACE2 receptor, angiotensin-converting enzyme receptor. So how you acquire this virus almost always is by first getting the virus on your hand after being in a public space, and then touching your eye, touching your nose, touching your mouth, or by eating something. You know, your waitress could have COVID and give it to you. I got it from the camp cook at elk camp. So, but you're not going to avoid exposure to it. You could stand in a 10-gallon bucket of the virus with a cut on your leg and you wouldn't get sick. But as far as I know, you don't want to put iodine in your eyes. So, yeah, just get yourself in shape and go get COVID.
Oh, well,
Natural immunity rocks.
well, I must. My moderator rule kicks in that. I don't think that's a no, not an official position. Please, don't get COVID if you can avoid it. Okay, that's Dr. Malaki.
Somebody took him off his leash.
Okay. I have a next question. Okay, all right. Next question. This is a little bit complex, so just simplify this for sake of clarity. The question is about if you had COVID earlier, but you continue to have symptoms like cough for 3 months and weakness. Do you still have COVID? Dr. Moore? Oh.
Lasting
So if you
side
had
effects.
COVID positive, and then you continue to have some cough or some other weakness, symptoms, fatigue, do you still have COVID 3 months later?
Well, I think anybody who practices medicine is well familiar with the viral upper respiratory infection or viral infection that eventually ends up with bacterial colonization. So when you've got a viral infection like COVID, your body's inflamed, your immune system is focused on fighting off perhaps that particular pathogen, you're producing additional secretions and mucus, and so there's a reasonable chance that those secretions, the sputum, the mucus, can become colonized with bacteria. So we don't think COVID lasts that long, but if you continue to have symptoms, say after 10 days, I mean, it makes sense to see a physician. Something else could be going on. You could have pneumonia, perhaps you have reactive airway disease or asthma or something that got flared up. So it's always worth getting evaluated if you continue to have symptoms beyond, say, 5 to 10 days.
Well, think about it as a rash, right? If you have a rash, is the cause of the rash gone, or if you keep scratching it, you keep perpetuating it, right? So if you keep coughing, keep irritating your upper respiratory tract and or have ongoing inflammation, not necessarily from the infection of the virus, but ongoing inflammation, which is sort of now stuck. You need to sort of break that cycle somehow. There's also some data suggests that long haulers have hidden coronavirus in their system that doesn't get completely eradicated by your immune system. So that's something else interesting, and today's Record Searchlight suggested some treatment options in that. So.
Why is diabetes considered a risk factor for COVID?
So diabetes is probably one of the most common ways to get a bad immune system. And I've hospitalized 6 people for COVID of those 210, and actually 4 of 6 were diabetics, but they were also over 300 pounds. Diabetes causes microvascular damage to your blood vessels, and your body just gets poor blood supply. Also, when you weigh 300 pounds, your bone marrow is replaced with fat. The bone marrow is the factory for your immune system. And if you think about your immune system like an army, you have no army men when you weigh 300 pounds. So it's, diabetes is a real, now if you control your diabetes, you are at no more risk than a 30-year-old yoga instructor. So.
Okay, I have a question here. Alpha variant who got it, then vaccinated, then Omicron, and it's worse second time. what trends are you seeing between Alpha, Delta, and Omicron now, and where do you see it's going? I'm combining a couple of questions together because we have a lot of questions. So somebody wants to talk about initial, Delta, Omicron, and future wave. How about you, Rob?
Okay, well, I've certainly treated some people with COVID, not as many as I might have otherwise. It seems like natural immunity does confer some decreased severity of infection. Unfortunately, each of the variants has its own unique signature, and the body doesn't always protect you from getting the next variant, but there's enough kind of cross-reactivity with the immune system that it should be relatively less severe over time. I think a good analogy here, and again, this is speculative at the moment, but I think was going to play into the end of this, I hope, is, and the teachers on the stage can probably attest, maybe especially Katie, the kindergarten teacher, that the first couple of years of teaching, you're sick pretty much all the time. But after that, the body starts to have seen this virus and that virus and such, and your immune system builds up a pretty good defense. Hopefully that answers the question.
How do we know if we are serious enough to need a doctor?
Well, one of the things I've been asking my COVID patients to do is get a pulse oximeter. Everyone who doesn't have one in this room should get one on their way home. The serious thing we were discussing called the cytokine storm gives a hint that it's starting to happen when all of a sudden your oxygen starts to drop. And oxygen, you know, in healthy people that don't smoke is supposed to be over 95%. So most of the people in this room are over 95%. I'm probably about 55. But I know. So no, it's a very useful tool as a hint that, oh, guess what? The cytokine storm is happening. In the analogy with the snowball, that if you're below 90, the snowball has become the size of a car, and you do not want to let that hit you. So, and the people that roll in the ER, they're calling them happy hypoxemics. Hypoxemia means low oxygen. Normally, if someone's at a 60, they are struggling to breathe and they're laboring, and I worked in the ER 7 years, you can say, oh boy, that person's in respiratory trouble. These people stroll in and say, something doesn't feel right. And then they put the oximeter on them and they're 60. And then they're in the ICU in an hour and a half. So have one of those oximeters. It's a very useful tool, and I depend on that communicating with my COVID patients. Check every 6 hours when you're sick.
So just some general guidelines on that. Like you said, 95 or greater, you're good, but maybe talk about early interventions, taking good care of yourself, taking some of the supplements and that kind of stuff. 90 to 95, generally, when we see those patients in the emergency room or in the hospital, we can offer them some of the monoclonal antibodies, steroids, that kind of stuff is what we typically start with. If you drop below 90%, that's when you get admitted to the hospital, you get put on oxygen, we start remdesivir and some of the other medications. So they're sort of broken down into those 95 and greater. Talk to your doctor, but do what you feel comfortable with. Below 95, definitely talk to somebody.
One reason you don't want to drop below 90 is you start burning brain cells. How many of you have brain cells to spare? Okay, most of us don't.
I'm trying to kill my brain cells here.
Don't burn your brain cells. If you drop below 90, you need help.
All right. Go ahead, please. Next question.
Dr. Amy, can you put your COVID survival kit on the website?
Yes, that was. It will be on the website. And then there were quite a few questions. I kind of read through some of them about, let's see, there was a zinc toxicity. Can you have zinc toxicity? It takes a lot of zinc to get toxic. I recommend, 10 to 20 milligrams. And usually you have to take, and that's of elemental zinc. Look on the back to see the elemental zinc. And usually you have to take like 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams of elemental zinc to see those toxicities. But if you start seeing a lot of, GI symptoms or even bloody vomit or blood in your urine, you're taking way too much. And then read to the end of that COVID toolkit. If you can't find a provider in the area to to get some of the prescription medications that you're interested in. There are telemedicine references in that toolkit where you can just have those things ready to go if you get sick.
How can one get an antibody check to see if they've gotten COVID and gotten over it?
Oh, easy blood test. I order it. I've had patients tell me they were able to go to LabCorp Lab, Court Street and Gold Street, and just actually get the IgG antibody drawn, and I think they charge $10. So, perfect. And it's a very worthwhile thing. One of the big questions I've been getting since the variants have come out and people are wanting the boosters is, hey doctor, do I need a booster? Well, if you're healthy and the first 2 vaccines took, you don't really need a booster. So get your IgG checked. IgG is the memory antibody. It's the elephant that doesn't forget. I have IgG in my body from 60 years ago having measles. So.
Okay, great.
So, wait, one more thing. So in the antibody test, commercially available antibodies, there are 2 types. There's IgG-S, which is meant for spike protein. Now you get that antibody if you're vaccinated or you have natural immunity. Now on the other hand, if you have natural immunity, you will produce the S spike antibody, but you also produce nucleocapsid antibody. So if you want to know whether you got vaccinated, but did I really have natural infection or not, don't check the S antibody, because that's going to be positive for you if you have vaccinated. But you want to check the nucleocapsid one. That only occurs if you are naturally immunized.
Okay, so just a follow-up to that question. If you have the antibodies, that does it mean that they have a good chance of not catching COVID? So the question is really someone who doesn't think that they ever had COVID. They have been asymptomatic. And if they check the antibodies, can they feel comfortable that they won't likely have a bad COVID?
So with almost all viral illnesses, there is a standard of what antibody levels is thought to be protective for the future. Because this is a new virus, we haven't gotten that standard from the labs yet. So that's a tough question, the quantitative question to answer. But qualitatively, I've been telling all my patients this because it's true, and it's in chapter 1 of the immunology book. If you want to compare vaccinated immunity, and that's any vaccine that's ever been invented, and natural immunity, which is what the wondrous thing that nature does with your body, it's like comparing a paper airplane to the space shuttle. The space shuttle's better.
Should pregnant women get the vaccine?
It's a very good question. So if you ask ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, they say that yes, it's safe and effective. What I don't know is how they know that, because they were excluded in the trials. I say no. What we know right now is the tip of an iceberg. If you can imagine, there's a huge volume of data that's coming. Look at train wrecks we had like thalidomide. Oh yeah, that was safe, right? No, that was absolutely not safe. We don't know. And so if I don't know, I'm not going to put it in my body if I'm pregnant. That's my take.
So, just a question, curiosity. But the question can be that, well, there is a risk of them catching COVID too. There is a risk of getting COVID to the woman as well as the fetus. So how do you, and I know there's an uncertainty, there's no perfect answer. So how do you compare that, getting COVID versus getting COVID vaccine?
So I've treated a lot of COVID patients in the hospital. They didn't know they had COVID. They just tested positive and they had a little cold. I have only seen maybe 1 or 2 patients in the ICU who are pregnant, and they had comorbidities, usually severe obesity. On the whole, pregnant ladies do okay.
So maybe for the high-risk people, you would say it may be reasonable for them to at least talk with their doctors about that?
I'm not sure about safety
Okay.
data. I'm very
Dr.
concerned.
Traugott has some.
You certainly can always talk to your doctor about it, but Amy is right. You know, was it studied? Remember, pregnant women were not part of the study. They were not part of the risk study that Pfizer did. Pfizer did happen to have 270 women that turned out to be pregnant during their study. And that wasn't because they were allowed, but that just happens the way pregnancy happens. And they did not have follow-up data on 238 of those mothers or those pregnancies, but they did on 32 of them. 28 of the 32 that they had follow-up on, the fetus was lost, the fetus was stillborn, or the baby died. So pay attention. We are telling mothers that, oh, go ahead and get this vaccine, and we know that we are not getting the correct information always, and it's unfortunate. But like I said, we did not have follow-up on 238 of them, but nonetheless, we had follow-up on these. And how often out of 35 pregnancies do 28 of them end in death of the baby? Unless it's this day in honor of Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, I wrote a vaccine exemption last week for she's an ultrasound tech, and she lost her first pregnancy at 9 weeks, about a week after her first vaccine. So, and then now she's pregnant again, and they're forcing her to get another vaccine, and I wrote her an exemption, and I don't know if they'll take it or not.
So, okay, moving on to the next question. Trista, would you please? Yeah.
Can masks cause strep throat?
Well, we don't know, I guess. Nobody is.
Why not? As Katie was saying, that we have these kids, they have a mask, they've got this stuff around their face, wet, like an eczema around their mouth. What better place for strep to grow or for staph to grow? The two things that can cause impetigo. And of course, if you have a strep that also can cause strep pharyngitis, you bet you can get that, because all you're doing is breathing out into a mask and breathing it back in. And now, kids that are less than 2 usually don't get strep and strep throat, but kids over 2, and that's all these people, all these kids that we're putting masks on are at risk for getting that.
Okay, there's a question about myocarditis, especially in the younger population, and two parts. One, why it affects younger people, not the older people who generally have the heart problem. And second is that how do you avoid, if you want to take vaccine, how do you avoid myocarditis?
Myocarditis is a bad thing to have. And myocarditis, people have been, in the media has been trying to tell us that, oh, it's rare. Well, diamonds are rare unless you're in a field of diamonds and you look at them. The fact is that it is not rare when you start looking for it. We had 200 cases of myocarditis that were looked at by the FDA, and then they realized, well, gee whiz, this isn't that common. Well, within weeks after that, once people started realizing we should be looking for it. We should be looking and checking these people that come in with a little bit of chest pain and finding out if they have it. And they did, and the numbers escalated crazily. So why is that important? Well, myocarditis kills the cells in your heart. Your heart doesn't make new cells. You cut your finger and you'll make new cells. But if you kill a cell in your heart, it's gone. Just like the ones in your brain, they are gone. So now you have this heart that's damaged, And just like in the days of polio, when your muscles were damaged, your muscle cells were killed, well, your muscles can hypertrophy and they get bigger and stronger, and your heart can do that. And that's fine for young people maybe, but as you get older, the death of those cells and the loss of those cells now become apparent, and they become at ages younger than typically you see in cardiac failure. Moreover, we are seeing people dying on athletic fields. The young people at the prime of their life in physical conditions that I wish I could have been in sometime in my life, and they're dying. And they're dying because they took a vaccine that was mandated or voluntary, and it caused damage to their heart and all the complications that can occur. Abnormal heart rhythm, poor pumping, and any number of other things that you can see. It is a bad thing, myocarditis, and we ought to be respecting it.
We'll go to the next question. Could you please? Okay.
Is it dangerous to give the vaccine to an epileptic or somebody who has seizures?
Yeah, it's not a good thing. Now, I've not taken care of many epileptics, but I've taken care of people who have had neurologic abnormalities as a result of their vaccine. And one person in particular, a friend of mine, got a vaccine, and within 24 hours, the left side of her body she could not feel, and she could not manage to work with it. In addition, though, in her case, she also was having her menstrues at the time and was having abnormal clotting. And she was frightened out of her mind, and as she should be, because her practitioner then said, "Oh, this vaccine always goes to the weakest part of your body, so don't worry, go get your second one." Who would say that to somebody that just had loss of function in half of their body? So if I was still in practice, I would caution against that in my own patients.
Okay.
Would someone please comment on the efficacy of wearing an N95 mask? In close contact with people or in large crowd?
Well, yeah. So wearing a mask of any kind for preventing yourself getting illness is pretty much like putting a picket fence around your house to keep mosquitoes off your porch. The viruses, I mean, bacteria are small. Viruses are 1,000 times smaller. 1,000. When I'm sick with COVID on my third day, I have 500 billion virions in my body. Do you think that you can somehow avoid exposure to that? We're in a pandemic. Everyone in this room and most of the surfaces in this room are covered with a very fine dust of COVID RNA. Everyone, you all have it on you. And it's dead. It's dead. But that's why everyone's testing positive. If you could test the floor, it'd be positive. So the scale of viral infection is lost on most of us, and that's okay. No one needs to think about how many viruses there are, but there's so many you just can't even believe it. Don't touch your face. That's how you get it.
What I found is washing your hands is extremely helpful.
Oh, washing your hands is great.
And certainly if you are sick, then make sure that you cover your cough, your sneeze, and if someone in your family or close contact is high risk, immunosuppressed, or whatever is high risk, then you really need to be careful with them. But in general, you know, I mean, we've seen that it is really not helping much. Everyone is getting it.
So you're saying a mask is like a picket fence. So then what is this like?
Yeah, you can't avoid exposure to it. One of the original mask studies was probably 30 years ago. A guy did some volunteer work, a surgeon did volunteer work in Africa, and in Africa, back then at least, most of the operating rooms, no one wore a mask. They didn't have any. And he did a study on the relative infection rates between masked operating rooms with laminar flow and unmasked operating rooms, and there was no difference.
So we'll just go over a few more questions, in the interest of time here. And you want to have any question? Katie, you want to read this or something?
Would there be fewer deaths if we used early treatments?
And the next question is that where do we find that?
Oh, yeah, so there's some who are not prescribing it or even got a prescription and went to the pharmacy and they won't fill the prescription. Where can someone find ivermectin or these other treatments or get a hold of those treatments?
Ivermectin is available. It's available out. It usually comes out of India, and one of the problems is that our government is obstructing the delivery of that. There are pharmacies that you can go through Canada and get ivermectin with a prescription, but that also comes from India, and there are some sites where you can order ivermectin from India without a prescription. So, but it takes weeks to arrive, and as Dr. Hamilton was saying, this may be done. This may be done before you even get the ivermectin, and it's expensive. Let me tell you, been there, and it's very, very expensive.
Okay. Next, home tests. Home tests, are they accurate?
Also, I think just to clarify, so you're saying it's coming from India. Is that a bad thing? Can we still do that? Is there a website?
No, it's made there, and it's made in generic forms, and people want to tell you that, well, it's a horse medicine, and we know that's not. Lasix is a horse medicine. That's your horse can't win the race if it had Lasix, but. This is a medicine that's been around for decades, and it's been very useful, as has hydroxychloroquine, which, thank goodness, has been around for prevention of malaria. And if your doctor writes for hydroxychloroquine and says that it is for prevention of malaria, you can get that filled.
I think you answered this question already, but the home test, how accurate are home tests?
Not.
Okay, that's clear. Dr. Kunitas, for you, a combination of questions, effect of COVID or vaccine or a combination on fertility for women, menstrual cycle and fertility.
I'm concerned about fertility because the spike protein, one of the places it accumulates is in the ovaries. We don't know. We're so early in this, we don't know what happens to future fertility rates. It's very concerning.
So what I hear is that lack of long-term data, and 6 months or 12 months is not a long-term data. You're talking about a few years or 5 years, 10 years data. We don't have that. That's the uncertainty. And I guess same thing could be said about something called autoimmune diseases. If you're going to have vaccination every 6 months and you're stimulating your immunity every 6 months, are we hyper-stimulating them? Are we at risk of autoimmune conditions? That's a legitimate question. We don't have the answer. Probably we won't have the answer for many, many years.
Fertility involves two people. Okay. One of the adverse effects of the vaccine is testicular swelling and injury. We know from many, many years ago with mumps vaccine or mumps virus that could cause a lot of injury to your body. One was sterility because of its effect on the testicles. It also could lead to increased risk of diabetes. But this vaccine is associated with testicular swelling, testicular injury, and there, in animal studies, there was a 17% reduction in fertility in those animals. So we are expecting that there will be that reduction in men as well. But we also know that nanoparticles, this was a study that looked at, and I think in 2014, nanoparticles, which are also found in the vaccine, do collect in the ovaries and in the testes, so that we know that it goes there. We also know that the spike protein can collect in those same tissues, in fatty tissues, and can cause injury.
What is being done or can be done for people with post-COVID damage from the effects of COVID?
Well, I can tell you what I'm doing, I guess. So I don't feel like I've got a lot of long COVID patients. The early intervention with steroids is maybe to blame for that. I don't know. No way to tell. Yeah, I had one interesting one. She got, her infectious mono got reactivated. She got chronic fatigue from that, but then I was able to fix her with the antiviral drug. But yeah, what I've been doing is if patients are slow to recover, number one, check their vitamin D. So in fact, a real quick thing, I had a couple in 3 months ago, 40, they work out 5 days a week. She's a nurse in the ICU and he's a cop. She could take me. She's about 110 pounds. She's perfect. And I saw him Monday and I said, hey, you guys are going to be better. You take this steroid, you're going to be better on Wednesday. And she gave me a text on Thursday morning. She said, hey, I'm better, but my husband's worse. And his husband is like, you look at her husband, you think he's an Adonis. So we sent him to the lab. His vitamin D was 15. And after 3 days of 10,000 units a day, he was fine. So vitamin D does your bone, does everything in your bone, and your bone marrow is the factory for your immune system.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions about, somebody wants to know the local data on efficacy of remdesivir in hospitalized COVID patients, and also the data on patients dying from COVID-caused death versus COVID-associated death, like you may die from second thing. So does anyone know the local data that how many deaths have been because of COVID versus COVID was an association? So does anyone have the information? So someone wants to know whether, well, the hospital should be really reporting that, and is there any audit for that? Well, we don't control that as physicians, the audit part, but that's a legitimate question you can ask elected officials. But we are not in a position to comment on that. But we can comment. Do you have any information on remdesivir's benefits in the hospitalized or non-hospitalized patients?
I think it's important that we recognize that those figures can be skewed, and I suggest we follow the money.
Okay. Fair enough. But anyone can comment on remdesivir?
So remdesivir is only available in the hospital, so you can't get it outside of the hospital. So
Right.
all those patients are going to be severely ill. I don't know the data specifically on the local as far as the benefits versus risk. We treat everybody who's on oxygen with remdesivir as our local protocol.
So you work in the hospital as a hospitalist all the time. So what's
Not
your,
all the time.
Okay, not all the time. Sorry. I meant that you do provide the service. So what's your personal take on that? Is it beneficial for the sick patients or what?
Well, you know, as with a lot of these things, when you treat an illness, you don't just have, you know, one tool in your chest that you're always going to go to. You use a variety of different treatment options at your disposal. And so remdesivir is one of those tools.
Okay. And there was another question.
There was a study by a group on Ebola virus, and they were studying 4 different drugs that were being used to treat Ebola virus. And one of the drugs had to be removed from the study because of kidney failure and death. Now guess what that drug was? Remdesivir. And this is not a political statement, but the study was under Dr. Fauci. And so, you know, and reported by him.
Okay, so we're really getting to the end of this, and maybe this will be the last question you want to ask.
The last question, for all of us who are going to go home and sit in an Epsom salt bath, how long do we need to be in that bath?
As long as you can get away with it. No, I would say, I recommend 3 to 4 cups in that Epsom salt bath, and then, 30 minutes to an hour. The magnesium goes through your skin, and then it doesn't give you the side effects from taking it orally. And then when your body's had enough magnesium, it's just going to turn off those receptors. So there's no risk of overdosing. So enjoy a nice long
I know
bath.
you're an OBGYN. Can you write a prescription for me? Okay. So we have had a lot of questions, and some of them we may have missed. Please forgive our imperfections in arranging this forum and running the show here. I hope you found it valuable, but I would really like to bring this to an end. I would, again, appeal to you to go to the website, sign up for the email for the future events. We may do another event in a few weeks, maybe focused more on children and educators.
Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being curious, for coming out and listening. We really, just from listening to these doctors as they've been planning, their deepest heart's desire was to bring the community together, to give hope, to give information, to give us courage to move forward together in a positive way. So they really have poured their heart and their minds into this event. So thank you for coming.
I also want to thank the organizers, the volunteers, the host for the hall, the panelists, but also each one of you to come here, as well as those who are watching us online. So with that, thank you, and go home, watch the 49ers game. Go 49ers! Thank you. Thank you, everyone.